Thank you, Burr, and welcome everybody. I'm very pleased to be invited to participate in the 4th Division layout tour offerings. So this is kind of an interesting one because it's two sessions back to back, as Burr said. One is on the layout itself physically, and the other one after the break will be on how we do some of the operations on the layout. So hopefully you guys have had an opportunity to take a look at the website. They give you some insight into it, but if not, you'll get a lot of opportunity to see stuff here. And the website link is posted on the last slide as well. So here we go. So this is a 4th Division offering, but of course I'm from the 7th Division. So I promised that I would make the logos the same size. So here's a quick overview of what we're going to be doing. Part 1, which we're just into now, we're going to talk about a little bit the prototype. We're going to take a look at the overall layout, then do a bit of a walking tour of it. Then we're going to leave this for the PowerPoint, and I've got a couple of videos to show. Then we'll do a Q&A, a bit of a break. And then as Burr said, we'll go into part 2, which is about the operations of the layout, and then conclude that with a little bit of Q&A as well. So there's a lot of stuff that I have to cover here. So we're going to move along pretty quickly. I do model the CPR in the southeastern part of British Columbia. So here we see our map of BC up in the upper left-hand corner with the 49th. Red box is the boundary area. And the map down below here with the colored lines on it is from Roger Burrow's excellent milepost book. And it shows specifically the area I modeled. Nelson is the divisional point for the CPR for the boundary subdivision up here in the upper right. And then the yellow line is the boundary subdivision traversing 126 miles over 2 passes and ends up at midway in the lower left corner of the map here. And there's the border right down there. So the green lines represent other railway lines. Some of them are Great Northern and some of them are the CPR. Today, we're going to focus on the yellow line, which is the boundary sub, but there is another green one down here, which is a Phoenix sub we'll have on the layout at some point in time. And over here at Castlegar, this line running south is the Roslyn sub, which we handle via a trail staging yard on the layout. And up here in the top is the Slocan sub that heads up to the Slocan Lake and the barge operation, which we'll also have on the layout eventually, but we're not going to talk about that today. And lastly, out of Nelson, the GN had a line that went down into the States through Salmo in this way. And we do model part of that on the layout. Again, we're not going to talk about that much today, the end of it all. So this line traverses some pretty rugged territory. As most of you know, southeastern BC, much like a lot of Washington state, is pretty rugged stuff. And so although this line is 126 miles long, it's only 75 miles from point to point. So it takes 50 more miles to get from A to B in this particular area here as well. So there's lots of tunnels and bridges on this line as well, which makes it quite spectacular. You get a chance to see some of those in the coming photographs. Here also compliments of Roger Burrow's is the profile. Again, Nelson on the right-hand side here and midway over here, 126 miles later on the left. So that gives you an idea why it takes so long to get from A to B. There's 2 passes on the line. We model both of them, or will. And those grades that you see there are 2.2%, most of them. That's the ruling grade for the CPR on this line. And the layout actually does capture those 2.2% grades in most of the areas. So pretty rugged. And these stats are actually on my website, but I just captured them in here for those that didn't have a chance to take a look at it. 1,200 square foot train room, kind of an irregular shape. You'll see that in a minute when we look at the plan for the layout itself. The main line currently is at 400 feet, but it will eventually be about 550 feet, although we haven't quite finalized the last design or the last component of the layout. So, you know, that might change a little bit, but we use a lens system with CVP wireless on top, so we can run plug-in throttles for the yards if we want. And then we have the capability of running 16 wireless throttles in the layout room as well with the wireless system. We haven't got anywhere near that yet, and I'm not sure we ever will, but you can go back and look at some of that stuff on the website if you want at another time. So I was thinking about how to put this layout tour together, and it occurred to me that if you guys are like me, when you go to see a new layout for the first time in the real world, not the COVID world, you tend to walk in the door and kind of pan around the room and get a sort of a feel for the layout. You look around, you wander up and down some of the aisles and just kind of check out the layout, where the yard is and, that sort of stuff before you get into the detail. Particularly if you're going to operate the layout, it's always great to scout it out first ahead of time. So what I decided to do is to do some overall photographs of the layout from the aisles. And then we'll go back and actually start the actual walking tour of the layout where we'll go around and look at the locations individually. So with that, we're just going to take a quick walk around, big picture stuff. So there's the plan of the layout. It's, as you can see, it's a bit of an awkward shape. It's to do with the way the house was designed. And for those of you that asked me this question, no, I didn't design the house around the layout room. It was definitely the other way around at the end of the day. And for those of you that are married, that's the way it really works. And so here you're standing at the entrance to the room. And from there, when you look inside the room, this is what you see. You're standing in the doorway, you're looking in. So that gives you a bit of a feel for the view looking into the room. You can see it's a multi-deck layout because we're going over passes. It's actually very much a three-dimensional puzzle, in fact, at the end of the day. So gives you a bit of an idea of what it looks like. So we're going to go over here. Hopefully you're seeing the red arrow. So we've gone over to the east end of the layout, which is where the layout physically started construction. And we're going to look down that aisleway there. So now we're looking down the east end of the layout. This is the east staging yard, which is an active switching yard as well from an operations point of view. Down here in the lower right is a barge slip. That barge slip was built by Patrick Lawson. It's not yet operational, but gives you a bit of a feel for the yard. It's about 20 feet long or so. Now, if we walk down to the other end of the aisle and look backwards, that's what it looks like from the other end. The barge slip way down there. So we have Thomas making a little cameo appearance in here. My granddaughter loves that engine, so it shows up in a few pictures here and there. Then we're going to go under the knot under here to the other side of the aisle. And we're going to look backwards. And way down there is the door we stood at. So this is the main aisle. There's the Nelson yard on the left-hand lower deck. It's about a 35, 40-foot long yard. And the scenic part of the layout up there, notice that, Jack, there's scenery up there. And then Farron on this side and a really messy desk. Now we're going to wander down to the other end of that aisle, stand where we were when we came in the room in the first place, and look down the other way. So that's what you see if you just turn right and look down the aisle when you come in the door. So again, Nelson yard on the lower deck, and then Farron and the scenery up above. These decks, somebody asked me this, the Nelson deck is, I believe, 43 inches, and the Farron deck up on top is 67, coming downhill to about 64 here. So it gives you a bit of an idea of the deck heights. Then we're going to turn 180 degrees, look down the other aisle. So South Slocan down here at the end, here's the main line on the lower left, wrapping around, coming back, and carrying around this way. This is framing for the future phase on the layout. We're building it in phases, as many of you know. So over here on the left is the west staging yard, which is basically two modules, a 4-foot module and an 8-foot module. And we just keep moving them around the layout. So this is the fourth location for those modules. The layout was 180 feet long when we put them in the first time. And then now it's 400 feet long. And we have one more place to move them before they'll be scrapped. So now we're going to wander through here and come around and look down this aisle. So here we see, looking down the aisle, we've got the main line on the upper left here, running around, and over here, way up here, which is basically tree storage right now, is actually the modules for what will eventually be the permanent west staging yard for the layout. That's 72 inches off the floor on this side. It's a little less on the other side because of the raised floor. And down below here is the GN sub, the Great Northern Line that went through Selma. We won't be talking about that today. This is one of the few areas in the layout that's 3 decks high. We're just going to turn 180 degrees, look down the other aisle. Here's the main line coming down here on the lower deck. There's Castle Guard down there in the distance. There's that same Great Northern Line on the right. Up here is the tunnel siding area. On the left is Grand Forks, which is the next phase, in fact, of the layout. And we're going to go around the helix and look down this big long aisle here. The room is 45 feet long at this point. So it's a long haul. So this is the main line on the lower deck going way down to the end through a tunnel and back around this way here. Down here is the staging for the Great Northern. Up here is the future Midway yard. And over here is framing for the next future phase of the layout. We put some of the framing in already, mainly because it's handy to store stuff on. And then we just go down the end of the aisle, look backwards. And that's what you see looking backwards. So again, main line on this side, main line on this side, Midway up on top here. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a feel for what the layout looks like physically. I'm quite focused on the architecture of the layout. So a lot of the framing is cantilevered here. I'm not a big fan of skirts and stuff because mainly you just store a lot of crap under your layout. I found that last time I had a layout. So this one's cantilevered a lot. So we spent a lot of effort on the architecture of the layout, the colors, the fascias, and keeping it relatively clear from that point of view is fairly important to me. So that's kind of the basic tour of walking around the aisles. So now what we're going to do is we're basically just going to go back to the beginning and walk around all the locations on the baling layout, starting from the staging yard and ending at the west staging yard. And we'll talk about various aspects of those locations and some of the prototype things, some of the signature scenes and structures that we have on the layout. So with that, let's go back to the beginning. So same plan. Now we're back to that east staging yard again over here. So the format of this part of the presentation is just, I'm going to put a red star where we're talking about and the name, and we'll just talk our way through the layout and go for a walk here. So we saw that picture a little bit earlier. Thomas isn't there anymore, but this is an active staging yard on the layout. There's a whole bunch of tracks there you can see. It's a combination staging yard, and it also represents Proctor, which was a siding on the CPR main line heading east from Nelson. And we like that combination because it is an active location and also because it had that barge slip that we talked about a minute ago. And that creates a really good opportunity from an operations point of view because a barge is basically just a staging yard on its own. So we can use the barges for as cassettes effectively from that point of view. So this barge operation ran until into the 70s, so it was still very much active at the time of my era in the early 1960s. I call it 1960, but it's really an ish from an era point of view. And we will have some structures in this area because it is a visible part. So we're going to be building the Proctor station that you see down here in the lower left, sort of a classic CPR building. And then compliments of Rob Badminton. I know Rob was on the call. Here's a beautiful shot of the barge. There's the actual slip on the west arm of the Kootenay Lake, taken in the 80s. The barge was no longer operational at that point, but you can get a sense of the topography and the scene there from this particular photograph. So it's a great opportunity from an operations point of view. I just wanted to show you this. I've interjected a few larger pictures in here because I know sometimes the small ones are hard to follow, but these are the barges that ran up the lake from that slip we just talked about. This is a great picture from the archives. And here you can see two barges here. These are lower cars. And this is a mine up the lake, heading up the Kootenay Lake from where we were. And the tug would push these things up to this dock, tie them up, leave them there, go away. And this stiff leg crane here with a clamshell on it would actually load the ore off of a Jesus big dock here into these ore cars. The ore got down to that dock from a conveyor. This is the mine up here. And the mine eventually got abandoned because they couldn't keep the water out from the lake. But interesting story here. One time they were loading these ore cars, and I guess they had a guy with an N on the crane, and he didn't load it properly, and the whole barge tipped over. And a whole bunch of those loaded cars actually went into the lake. I actually have pictures of that as well. So it's kind of interesting. The lake's not very deep there. And back in those days, they probably just shoved it around and carried on. Not too many environmental rules as there are nowadays. So now we're going to move around the layout. And this is Troop Junction. This is the junction between what was the Nelson and Fort Shepherd Railway, now Great Northern, and the CPR main line. And so it's an interesting area because it has an interesting track configuration. The railway reached there, the GN or its predecessor reached there in 1893. So they were there even before the CPR was. So a little bit hard to see, but here's an aerial of this location And hopefully I can help you understand this a little bit, but the GN line is in the trees here coming down. Hopefully you can see my mouse. And there's the CPR main line right there. And the CPR main line goes through the scene and carries on to the east. And then there's a Y and there's a siding. But what's also neat about this is you can see the remnants of the balloon track that runs out into the lake here. The time this was first built, the GN or its predecessor built their line down to this location and built a balloon track to turn their train around because they actually had running rights into Nelson or close to Nelson. So that balloon track was quite active for quite a few years. Eventually the CPR and the GN went through a convoluted agreement that allowed the CPR to take over the line between here and Nelson, and the GN had running rights on it. And they did to the day until it was abandoned. So a really kind of a neat area here. Here's a photograph of the scene, looking at it a bit more closely. The CPR main line kind of running through the middle here. There's the GN line disappearing into the trees. And then this is a tail track down here and the Y. And what's neat about this is when the GN came in from the States, they would come down this grade and they'd stop there, get their clearance and paperwork to get onto the CPR main line. And then they would enter the main line with the train, but leave the caboose up there on the hill. And they back the train down the main line out of the way, clear that turnout. And then they'd break the power off here, take it around the Y, run it all the way down to the other end of the siding, bring it back onto the train. And then they'd kick the caboose down the grade onto the main line here, back the train onto the caboose, and away it would go. And we actually model that operational procedure on the layout. We don't have a Y because we don't have room for it, but we still model that on the layout. So it's really kind of a neat thing from a model railway operations point of view to do that kind of thing. It's kind of a neat maneuver. This is one of my ready to be scenic areas on the layout. So here we have the CPR train coming through on the main line. There's the GN holding on the grade, and here's the tail track and what would have been the Y, but we just have a siding there. There's actually no Y at this stage. Neat area. There's little timber trestles all over the place in there. There's a beautiful Wilkie shot of it with CPR train going on the main line heading east. There's one of those bridges in the foreground here. They're all nice and small, so they're easily modelable. And holy crap, look at all the trees. You guys now know why I build a very narrow layout. It's because it takes 1 billion trees to cover this stuff. Now we're going to move on to the Kootenai Forest Products Mill, which is just in the outskirts of Nelson on the east side of Nelson. So it occupies the corner of the room here. The area is about 24 to 30 inches deep and 8 or 9 feet long. So there's an aerial shot of it in the 60s, in my era. This mill went through a lot of expansions, but that's kind of what it looked like then. A couple of neat things here. The main line, which is right here, literally went through the middle of the mill, right through the middle of the mill and out the other side. And they would run lumber across the tracks. There's the loading area here because that's where the kilns and stuff are, but they'd bring a lot of the stuff in off the green chain here and haul it across the train track. So it's an intriguing operation because it was a pretty busy mill for many, many decades while the main line actually ran through there. Other interesting thing to note up here in the upper right-hand corner, that cut up there, that's the Great Northern Line that we talked about a minute ago, and it goes way down the lake. It's so high above Nelson, they have to go 5 miles away from Nelson before they actually get to the lake level to turn around and come back to Nelson again. So kind of interesting. Nice shot from Mike Baroni. There's the mill in the background. There's the chip loader and all the beehive burner and whatnot. Some of the stock cars that CP routinely used to haul ties around on their service trains. And that's what the scene looks like right now. A bunch of foam core mock-ups and the track running through here. It's a configuration that's been there ever since we started operating the layout. And we're now actually revisiting the design of that area and how the buildings are laid out now that we have good photographs and a better understanding of how the mill operation works. My good friend Ken Rutherford on Vancouver Island spent a career in the lumber industry, so he's helping me understand how these mills work, so that hopefully when we actually finish these buildings off and rearrange things, it'll capture the essence of the mill. I mean, clearly in 8 or 9 feet, you don't have enough room to actually do that, but it's a pretty neat operation. So up until now, we've actually been on the Nelson sub. It's the subdivision that is east of Nelson, and Nelson, of course, being the divisional point. So now we're actually at the boundary sub and mile 0 from the boundary sub point of view. So of course, it's the main yard and the layout. And we're going to spend a bit of time talking about it here. So there's an aerial taken in the 60s, compliments of the Touchstone Museum there, but it gives you a bit of a feel for what the area is like. There's the west arm of the Kootenay Lake on the left. And there's the yard down below, you can see here. So we've got the station, we got an ice house, we got the diesel shop, the roundhouse and the shops building and whatnot stayed in operation for quite a few years. There's a turntable for a long time there. This is a neat yard because it's a southern main line. This yard isn't as big as a mainline yard. So it's much more scalable from a model railroad point of view and from an operations point of view. And because it's a smaller community, there's a lot of local industry. So on the lower right-hand side, there's a whole bunch of spurs down here for bulk fuel and coal facilities and the freight house and the ice house. And then as the line leaves town heading to the east, all along this line heading all the way out here, there's all kinds of warehouses and works yards, and there's an old ore loading platform and whatnot. So there's lots of really cool stuff there from an operations point of view. And we've tried to capture a bunch of that on the layout. And way up in the top of the picture, the smoke, that's the Kootenay Forest Products Mill way over there. And way up here on the right is the Great Northern Line that we talked about a bit, still way up high above Nelson going down the lake. So there's a great shot from Chris Bradley. There's several shots taken of the yard from this vantage point. There's just kind of a bluff up here off the old highway that before the trees grew, and you could get some really neat shots. So it gives you a bit of an idea what the yard looks like. Again, it's not huge from a prototype point of view, but one of the neat things about this yard is that over here on the left, these two tracks are cleanout tracks, and the yard used to handle a lot of freight cars and do a lot of cleanout stuff here. And every picture you see of this railway yard, there are cars galore on these two tracks. And so again, from an operations point of view, that's a really neat feature because you can jam cars in and out of there all day long because that's what they did. And the other neat thing about this, which is really hard to see in this photograph, but there's actually a narrow gauge track running down between these two standard gauge tracks. And I'm assuming, I haven't seen photographs of this, but I'm assuming that they had some push cars and things that they would shove up and down here, cleaning up the crap and bringing in dunnage and whatnot. So and you can see in the, late 60s, early 70s, they didn't care an awful lot about environmental stuff like they do nowadays. So it's a bit of a garbage dump out here with all the debris and stuff like that. But it does offer a neat modeling opportunity. And we have these two tracks on our layout, not nearly that big, but they really add to the operations. So here's the station, the divisional station that Nelson built in the late 1800s, went through probably 4 renovations during the course of its lifetime. It actually is a heritage building, was preserved, restored by the local community. It now has the Chamber of Commerce for Nelson, a coffee shop, some displays, and a meeting room and a couple little offices in it. So I've done a really nice job of restoring this, very important building that they had in Nelson at the time. So it's pretty cool. And here's a close-up picture of the yard itself. And so here we see the model of Nelson Station here. This is the model on our layout built by Patrick Lawson, who's you'll hear his name a few times in this presentation. In fact, he's built more buildings for this layout than I have right now. We're very, very fortunate to have him do that. So there's the station, full size, 36 inches long. He built it in Victoria where he lives, and we transport it back and forth in a special carry case. It can take it off the layout, as I've been doing recently while I've been doing all the work on the layout. But a really, really nice, really nice model, beautiful, beautiful structure. Another one of those signature structures in Nelson is the diesel shops here. These were built in 1952, 53, in that range. Beautiful shot from Mike Chandler of the shops with the classic Tuscan and gray scheme that CPR, at least I really like from that point of view. So these shops stayed in operation until they were demolished. They stayed abandoned for quite a few years. A lot of asbestos in that building. The paneling was asbestos and so on. So it sat abandoned for quite a while. Eventually, they took it out, but it handled a lot of the servicing for the sea liners and whatnot in that area. So here's 2 overall pictures of the model that's sitting on the layout. Again, from Patrick Lawson. This model is 80% full length, so it's a little over 3 feet long. It's full width. But we had to compress the length of the model a little bit to fit into the available space here. but you can get a bit of an idea of it all. Patrick built it with some 3D printing technology. And so the truss work for the open part of the roof here and all the bracing and stuff was 3D printed. We have a plexiglass lid effectively that we put on there so that you can actually see into the building. You can see the yellow overhead crane there. The building actually had two tracks here for the heavy shop, and then 2 run-through tracks here that went through the building for light servicing and whatnot. Because it's the divisional point, they swapped all the power and cabooses at this location. So it was a pretty busy area in its time. So now we're going to leave the main yard. We're going to cross the entrance door here. This is a swing gate that tucks into the side of the layout there. Go around the corner heading west, and our next location here 4 miles away from Nelson is the Kootenay River Bridge, which is a substantial structure going over the Kootenay River. Beautiful shot from John Zook. This particular train is actually a coal train heading to Castlegar and will eventually go up the Rossland sub to the Cominco Mill and smelter at Trail. This bridge is 9 spans long altogether. Here we're seeing 4 spans and then a couple more way over there. And then way down where that cut is, there's 3 more spans that cross what they call the flood channel. This is a fairly significant river. And back in the days before they dammed a lot of this river up, there's a lot of flooding risks to this area. So they actually built a separate channel to take extra water flow through here. So nice picture with a couple of sea liners on the head end. More recent shot from Doug Wingfield, beautiful color. In that shot, the big shadow that you see here is the highway bridge. That bridge was built in the 70s. You see it's not on the lower left-hand picture here. So that's great because I don't have to worry about it on my layout or on my backdrop in any event. And as some of you know, I have a drone. So here's a couple drone pictures that were taken last fall. This is an active railway bridge. This line still runs through Nelson to Castlegar and up to Trail. But that gives you a bit of an idea of what the bridge looks like here. We've got the 6 main spans here, and then 3 more spans off in the trees there as well. So this is how you will actually see that bridge on my layout. We're going to build it close to full length, so it'll be pushing 6 feet long physically from one end to the other. But it's a beautiful scene. So now we're going to leave that bridge and we're going to go down to the end of that aisle, and we're going to stop here in South Slocan. South Slocan was the junction point with the Slocan subdivision, 31-mile long subdivision, ran north up to the Slocan Lake and the sawmill operation and another barge. And so, although we're not going to talk about that really today, this line did go into another part of my train room here. There's a big shelf in here that's about 11 feet long that'll eventually house the mill and will house the barge, the Roseberry barge slip as well. Again, another one of those opportunities for moving equipment on and off the layout from a operations point of view. That's what the station looked like in the 1970s. So it's tucked in between the 2 legs of the Y, with the branch line going off one way and the main line going off to the right here the other way. My Y is actually reversed because of the way the layout design transpired. Most people wouldn't know that. I'll have to build everything mirror image to what the prototype was to make this configuration work, but not a big problem. And this is one of those ready to be scenic areas. I like that phrase. So this is looking at it here with the main line going around to the left. And this is the backtrack here, and the track way back here that goes around the corner, goes into the other room where the dispatcher sits. And we have a temporary switching area in there now, so that when you're running this train, the Slocan turn, there's some opportunity to do a little bit of switching there. This is the Slocan turn train sitting here holding on this backtrack, waiting for this extra to clear so he can resume his switching. Now we're going to go around that peninsula and around the other side, and then we're going to arrive at Castlegar. So Castlegar is another junction. This is the junction with the Rossland sub, which is 20 miles long. Currently, it's a bit longer than that back in the day. And primarily, that subdivision services the Cominco smelter. At one time, it actually went up to Rossland and served some of the mining operations and other industries as well. But as time went on, that line got abandoned. But this line is still in operations. It's still a lot of traffic that go down to the Cominco smelter. So this is a very busy area, even today. Keep this area location in your mind. And when we get into the operations part of the layout, you'll see just how busy it can be from that point of view. So a couple of quick pictures. Pictures from the, I think the 20s, to give you an idea. There's the station sitting in the Y again. There's the main line coming around, going off to the left, heading west. Here's the branch line coming around, going to Rossland and to Trail. And then there was a yard in here as well. They interchanged a bunch of cars on and off the subdivision. So very interesting operation. That's the Columbia River way off in the distance there. And this is kind of an aerial shot of what the yard looks like. So in my area, there's a stand-in station. The main line goes off and around the corner heading west. Down here is the branch line heading down to Rossland Sub, which is basically just staging. There's the yard area. And then these industries back here do exist in Castlegar, but they exist a little further down the Rossland Sub. We didn't have room to do that. It's hard to imagine. I know with a 1,200 square foot train room that you say things like, I don't have room for something, but there it is. And then the freight house and whatnot. So it's a busy area from a switching point of view, busy area from an operations point of view as well. And then here's a really nice shot from Mark Horn, again with nice scene liners and what I call baby train masters. And then there's a picture of it today. So we're trying to capture that kind of, the station tucked into the Y, the branch line coming off on the side and the main line running by here as well, train order board. So we're trying, these are a lot of the signature scenes and structures that we're trying to create as we go around the layout. As most of my friends will tell you guys, I'm pretty obsessed about prototype accuracy now. So we're working really hard on that. When we head west from Castlegar, not that far from the city along the Arrow Lake, is Celgar Pulp Mill. It's a very, very large operation. That's what it looks like from the air. And so I have to figure out how to compress that into some kind of presentable switching location on the layout in probably about an 8 or 9 foot length and 14-inch deep. So not going to fit all that well, but we want to try and create a little bit of an industrial feel. There's nothing there right now, some plywood and whatnot. My good friend Joe Green from Washington State has a beautiful pulp mill on his layout and has done a lot of research, and he's helping me understand the operation, how these things work, so that hopefully again we can try and capture a bit of the essence of it when we actually get to modeling the area. This is a future project. I have a big list of those. And we're continuing along the line. We're now at the McCormick Creek Trestle. This is one of 3 major steel bridges that were built on this line back in the late 1800s, early 1900s. This particular bridge is 410 feet long. It's got two big trusses in the deck plate gird on either end, and it's from the rail deck down to the creek valley is a little over 200 feet. So it's a very, very significant structure. I should actually mention at Castlegar, that Celgar mill that we just talked about, that's the end of the current line. It's now abandoned from this point and is now part of the Columbian Western Trail. So this is now a rail trail that the railway line is on. These bridges have all been preserved and the tunnels have all been preserved. But everything you see now going forward is actually part of a rail trail, not an active rail line anymore. So this is a Heckman photograph taken in the early 1900s. Shortly after the big timber bridge that was built here was replaced by the steel structure. And so there's one of my drone shots taken in 2017 of the structure. And I'll digress for a minute here. For those of you that are thinking about getting a drone, they're a great tool. I have a fairly small one, but I would just caution you that you really have to train yourself with these things. Unless you're a gamer, and looking at the gray hairs on the screen, I'm thinking most of us aren't. Running one of these things with joysticks and multitasking can be really entertaining, and not in a good way sometimes. This rail trail at the time was closed to vehicle traffic. I'm a member of the society up there, so I got special written permission to drive my truck on the trail and to fly the drone in and around a lot of these infrastructures. And some of the photographs and the videos that I've taken, they're actually on their website. So very important to know how to run one of these things and respect the environment and follow the rules. There's the mock-up that we built for the bridge. It's full size, so it's 410 feet long and 200 feet deep. We dropped the benchwork in this area, and the bridge will actually be built in effectively a slide-in module that we'll build in the garage and the shop area and slide in place. The main trusses, the three big trusses on the bridge and the two towers have already been prefabricated by Patrick Lawson for me. They're sitting on a shelf waiting for this project to get higher up on the list of things to do, but we're not quite there yet. So we're going to keep moving now. We've left the bridge down here. We've gone through a tunnel around the corner, and we've arrived at a siding called Kuykendall, or some call it Korkendall, although I can never figure out why, because there's actually no R in it. But here's a couple of Dave Wilkie pictures. This siding is very much in the middle of nowhere. A lot of this line is really isolated, particularly in the early days that I'm modeling, and before that, we're thousands of feet above the lake at this point. And so a couple of shots here just showing generally what the area looks like. The lake is way off to the right of the caboose there and a long way down. So we tried to create in the layout this feeling of isolation. So where this location is, where the star is, this long aisle we talked about earlier, 40 feet long, is very isolated. There's a backdrop behind us here as we're looking at this scene. You can't see the rest of the layout. You can't see heads bobbing around over on the other side of the backdrop. So we really wanted to create that feeling of isolation. The floor in this area is also a raised floor. There's a 6-inch raised floor here, so that because the layout's starting to get up quite high. Other thing, just to quickly point out, these are the standard CPR octagonal water tank that you see up here in the photograph. And a lot of those survived well into the diesel era. And the CPR actually kept them active. And two reasons for that. One was they still had a lot of steam operated equipment, particularly the hoists. And so they wanted to keep some of these things loaded up. But more importantly, as I mentioned, this is a really isolated area of the province. And forest fires and man-made fires are very much a risk, as we all know now, nowadays. And so the railway used to keep several of these tanks full so that they could dispatch water cars up to these locations and fill them and run them up and down the line to assist in fighting forest fires in the area. So they were preserved for quite a long time. So here's a picture of the layout as it currently exists. The structures were built by Brian Pate based on photographs and some standard plans. And the idea there you can see in the model picture is to try and emulate that scene that is in the prototype scene up above. So again, it's one of those little layout design elements that we're trying to capture. This one's a little ways away from an activity point of view, but the line still runs through there, so we're good for that. This is a really neat shot, a very moody shot taken by the late John Leeming. He was a locomotive engineer for the CPR down in the Boundary subdivision, and one of the locomotive engineers that actually carried a camera around with him. So it was pretty cool that he could actually stop and take pictures of his own train from time to time. So we were really pleased to be able to have this photograph in here. John's pictures are available to some of us, so we're really, really pretty happy to have those. So now we're going to leave Kuykendall here, and we're going to. This is a 2.2% grade, so we're climbing. We hit the Bulldog Tunnel entrance here. We go around my helix, which is 1 3/4 turns to gain altitude. Come out the other end here, and we come into tunnel siding, which is really just literally outside the tunnel portal. The Bulldog Tunnel is the longest tunnel on the line. It's 2,900 feet long. So it's quite significant. It was opened in 1900. It took 2 years to build it. So before it was opened, the railway used to go through a series of switchbacks to go over this pass. They have 5 switchbacks on each side, 5 up and 5 down at 4% grades. So it was a pretty brutal operation, but they built this tunnel in 2 years, which is pretty amazing considering they don't have a lot of the technology we have now. So there's the scene at tunnel. Just a few of those basic structures. So these will be a scene on my layout, one of those little ubiquitous scenes that, is just typical of railways, especially in this area. The track going off in the distance, the tunnel's right around the corner there. And this is the main line and the siding. This area was physically built on top of rock that came out of that tunnel. So this alignment for the tracks here was built after the tunnel was finished, and they just built the tracks on top of the rock that kind of went down the mountainside. And here's a neat part of this picture. These gray or these beige areas up here in the photograph are the old switchbacks. Back when this picture was taken in the early 70s, you could still see them. This mountainside is completely covered in trees. You can't see anything up there. anymore, but there is some wreckage up there. They had a wreck in 1899, and there's some of the old trucks and metal parts and stuff that are buried in the trees up there. I have photographs of them, but they were taken in the 70s. And there's really nothing there yet on my layout other than stand-in tunnel portal, and this is a track coming out of it and entering into the siding here. Those buildings that you see here will be in this little space and behind the locomotive. Again, that's a future activity for me. So that's the lower deck. Of course, we've actually gone up this 2% grade. So we've gone from 43 inches at Nelson up to, I think it's 58 or 59 inches at this point. And now we're departing the lower deck and going onto the upper deck, still going up at that 2.2% grade. So our next location here is this curved part of the layout, which is Porcupine Creek Fill. There's actually a bridge there at this at one point in time. Like most of these railways, same in the States, when they were first built in the late 1800s, they just wanted to get them in fast. And if you're building in areas like this, you don't have time for fancy bridges and you don't have time for fills. So they built a lot of untreated wood timber trestles for this line, like dozens of them, quite literally. And so this is a picture taken in, I think, 1911, according to the caption, of that same bridge where they're filling it in. And they use rock spoil from cuts and fills and all kinds of things like that to fill these things in. And they also did some hydraulic mining of the creek up the mountainside to fill this in. Again, something you wouldn't be able to do now. Would probably take 100 years just to get the permit to do it, but that's what it looked like back then. And then there's a Wilkie picture taken in 1974 looking the other direction. So there's the fill there. This is a huge fill. I can't remember how high this thing is, but it's probably pushing 150 feet. A lot of material in there, and somewhere inside that pile of dirt is the actual trestle itself. So, and this is a mock-up right now of the scene on my layout. We're coming up to 2.2% grade. So there'll be a little masonry culvert way down here at the bottom. This is nowhere near full size. Don't have quite enough room to do that, but it's kind of a neat scene. And again, it's one of those generic-y kind of railway scenes. There's nothing glamorous about it. It's just something that exists. So then we're going to leave Porcupine Fill and we're going to go around the corner past the old abandoned siding and come around to Farron. And this is the fun part because now we actually get to see some of the scenery. Farron was the summit, as you recall from that profile that we saw earlier. It's sitting at almost 4,000 feet above sea level, so it's up there. It's was a helper station back in the steam days, and we've actually maintained that helper status for the layout here. There's a drone picture taken in 2017. There's a billion trees. So again, you can understand why I built a narrow layout. We're looking east towards Nelson. That mountain range off in the distance is where the lake was, and the Bulldog Tunnel goes through this range right over here. So of course, these are all logging roads now. None of those existed back in the 60s or back before when the layout was built. So very, very isolated area up here. There was no way to get to this other than by train. So it's an undated picture of Farron. As I mentioned, it was a helper station. So the CP stationed their helpers up at the summit, which was a bit unusual, but this line wasn't that heavily trafficked. So I guess the business people there decided to put the helpers at the top and then dispatch them down and back up again kind of idea. So, which worked well in the summertime. In the wintertime, not so well. This is a brutal area at 4,000 feet in a mountain range. There's a lot of snow in here in the wintertime. But they had a little engine house here. They had a water tank, of course. They had a coaling tower, a couple of bunkhouses, and some other buildings in here as well. So it was kind of a neat scene. So we tried to capture it on the layout on a shelf that's only about 16 inches wide altogether. But we managed to capture the two section houses, station and the water tank. The backdrop's not there yet and whatnot, but it gives you a bit of a flair for the thing. Some of these models, again, were built by Patrick Lawson, Insull Brick back in the day. Another picture of a couple of baby train masters going through. They actually stopped at there was a water standpipe here, so they could actually get water up there at the top if they so needed it. And here's one of my trains coming into into the siding here. That's just beyond the water tank. And here's one of the legs of the Y going off to the left. The other leg's back here. So we have the Y on the layout and a double siding and a couple of setup tracks and whatnot. So this will be a fairly busy area on the layout. As I say, we're going to keep the helper operation on the layout from an operations point of view, even though technically it didn't exist at the time. But it's one of those things we can actually add in or not, depending on our operating session. So it gives us some flexibility. So there's another picture of that same train coming around the bend. So it's eastbound train. There's the one leg of the Y over there. The other leg of the Y is in the foreground, and those buildings are just off to the left of the photograph here. So this is an area that's just been recently scenic in the last month or so in order to prepare for a couple of clinics. And so with that, we're going to leave Farron, go around the end of the layout, and go down this shelf over top of Nelson. This is a 14-inch deep shelf, cantilevered off the wall. It's a little bit deeper where the snow shed is. So it's all cantilevered structure. And this is the Paulson snow shed, which is one of the two snow sheds that were actually on the line. This is the bigger of the two. It's also on a curve. And this snow shed lasted for quite a while. They eventually replaced it with an electric fence. And then that was taken out when the line was eventually abandoned. So again, and the snow shed's, of course, long gone at this point in time, but there's a photograph taken in the early 70s. This is the highway bridge way up above to get a bit of an idea of what it looks like. And there's a picture looking down on it. So that person was actually standing up on the highway bridge looking down on this snow shed at the time that this train traversed the snow shed. So extremely rugged area. It's a long way from that bridge down to this valley floor down below here. So here's a picture of the model. That's the downhill side of the model. So that C-liner on my locomotive or my layout here is sitting right where that chip car is, heading downgrade. The prototype 2.2%. My layout, this is only a 1.1% grade because of other conditions. The shed is built on a 59-inch radius curve, which is relatively close to what the curvature would have been on the actual prototype at the end of the day. So and Burr asked me to include a couple of photographs of the construction of the snow shed. It was totally scratch built based on prototype plans and the photographs that I had. So I've just interjected a couple of them here. It is a curved shed, so it was built in sections in order to be able to put it together to fit the layout. So you get a bit of an idea on the lower left here. There's some of the pre-cut panels that I built in the jig. This is the roof. It was all built upside down. So the roof panels were all built individually in 5 different sections. This is how I put the pieces together in the upper right-hand corner. I had spacers to make sure everything was at the right angle so it all actually married together because I basically built it in sub-assemblies and then basically put it all together. So here you see the thing upside down. The 2 end pieces here, and the middle one were built first. And then the roof structures were all put together. And then I infilled these 2 other pieces in place because of the curvature of the shed. I didn't want to take a chance in trying to pre-build things. I was pretty much convinced that that wasn't going to fit at the end of the day. The lower left-hand picture, you see 4 of the 5 sections built. The 5th one still to go in there. So this building has 16,000 scale feet of lumber in it altogether, and not including the roof deck because the roof decking is actually sheathing. And it has 1,100 individual pieces of lumber ranging from 2 feet in length to 65 feet in length. And it took me about 4 months to build while I was doing other things on the layout as well. I know Jack's listening, so this was actually an AP. I got a merit award for this that actually got me over the Master Builder Structures category. So it was built also with that objective in mind. But as you saw in the pictures, and you'll see here, this is a signature scene on my layout. And so I really wanted to invest the time in building this structure, to really high standard. The nut bolt castings are only on the ends. They're not through the middle of it. I thought even I'm crazy, but I'm not that crazy. So that gives you a bit of an idea. There's that locomotive going downhill. And for those that question why I built all the interior, there's the interior of it. We took that out of a GoPro video that we shot on the layout that you might be able to get a chance to see here in a couple of minutes. And so now with that, we're going to move downgrade a little bit, not very far, to the Paulson Tunnel, 365-foot curved tunnel. So we've captured that kind of look on the layout here. This was a fun project. These are actually photographs taken from the inside of the model tunnel looking out. So that's the one looking uphill. I cast all the tunnel portals, did a custom mold and cast them with some liners. There's the downhill side, so looking downhill as well. So kind of fun. The fascia where the tunnel exists actually has a slot in it for two reasons. One, to actually get at the track in case we have a problem, and two, we can actually put a camera in there. So these were actually taken with an Android. You'd never actually get a full SLR in there, but we have run a GoPro camera through here a couple of times. So it's actually kind of a neat, a night scene. Again, with the drone in hand, here's a drone photograph of the uphill tunnel, the one facing east. Very steep rock cut, as you can see here. These tunnels were originally rock bores done when the railway line was built in the late 1800s. And then in the 40s, they actually reinforced them with concrete portals and some concrete liners that go back into the mountainside a bit here. There's the model seen on the layout. Again, as I said, I actually custom made a mold for these tunnel portals with wood strips in them, so they have that kind of formwork look. It doesn't show up very well on the photographs here, but and there's the downhill one, the one facing west. This is an interesting one because this tunnel portal is about 25 feet back or ahead, I guess, of where the original tunnel rock bore was, which is back here in the trees. So the concrete liner you can barely see here. The concrete liner is actually exposed. These trees and all this crap here are actually sitting on top of the concrete liner for the tunnel. So my theory is that they built it further out just to provide some protection to the track in this area here from rock falls and whatnot. So we built it that way. You can see there's the concrete liner way back there. So we built the tunnel portal out here and the concrete liner that goes back into the mountainside. And then we have some fake rock molds that finish the rest of the liner off. And so now we're going to move across the door again. This is a lift out section that slides up out of the way. It sits at 64 inches above the floor during operations and then goes up to about 7.5 feet or so. This now is the temporary west staging yard location. This is the end of the layout. So we're now at our 400-foot point relative to where we started. And this is the two modules, 12 feet long altogether. There's a 5-track staging yard built in sections. So we've taken this apart and moved it. This is the 4th location for the staging yard. It's all pre-wired and has a tether on it, so we can just unhook it. We can take out the little splice tracks that join the two sections together and pull them apart, take the bolts out, pick them up, carry them around the room, put them back together again. So as I say, we've done that 4 times now. It has one more location to go. And then at that point in time, we'll abandon it because we'll be finishing the layout off to its the final west staging yard location some years from now. We're not sure when we'll do the next phase of the layout, but this has been a great strategy. I know some of you heard me talk about this before. If you got a big layout, this is and you want to operate it, this is a really good strategy. Build part of the layout, stick a staging yard on the end of it and start running it. And then keep adding on, keep adding on, keep adding on. You're going to learn stuff, but you're not going to get bored because you're going to be able to operate the layout and do other things as well as building the layout itself. So it's a great strategy from that point of view. It's worked out very, very well. And so that's the end of the walking tour. I'm talking pretty fast, but hopefully I'm staying reasonably on track. I will show you this one first. This is a drone video, obviously, unless I have my own helicopter, which I don't, and lets me do that. And so this was taken last fall. I like the fall colors. This is the railway line above Grand Forks. So this is the next phase of my layout. This isn't on the layout yet, but it's the same kind of geology and geography and trees and stuff. There's one of the old line side buildings. They preserved it for the trail. Again, this is another one of these rail trails that I have permission to be on. Right now, my drone is sitting off the side of the cliff here. It's probably about 500 feet from my drone to the ground. So if it crashes, I lose it. But there's a really neat tunnel that they built there. And you can see there's the valley on the right-hand side. So it gives you an idea just how high up we are with this rail line. This is on the way up to the second summit, the lower of the two summits at Eholt. And this is one of the 2 tunnels that was on that line. This is obviously another drone video. You saw pictures of this bridge earlier in my presentation. There was a couple of still shots, but I stuck this one in just in case we had time. So this is basically my drone video that those still shots were taken from of this 6-span bridge over the Kootenay River, looking out into the lake. So still very active. A bunch of deck plate girders, a couple of through plates. The big truss is osprey nests on top of this bridge. That's pretty common down in this area. You'll see those on power poles and bridges and other kinds of structures. Some really neat stonework on these piers. And this is a neat feature. It's a little tiny island here in the middle of the river. So the railway goes across that on a little bit of a fill, and then a couple more spans. And then that's the end of the 6 spans. And if we want another few hundred feet to the left, we would get to the other 3 spans that go over the flood channel. So very pretty area. The river is quite calm today. So this is actually a fairly fast GoPro video. We have a custom-made GoPro car that Ken Catlin printed on his 3D printer, where the GoPro camera tucks into the car. And this camera literally clears this snow shed by a couple of millimeters, or call that a 1/16 of an inch for you fellows at the end of the day. In fact, the first couple of trials, we actually kept whacking these braces when we went through this shed. So the GoPro is mounted vertically on the car. This was actually taken before I completely finished the scenery in this area. So it's a bit earlier than the current ones now, but it's pretty cool. It's a condensed video. It was, I think, probably 100 and some megabytes long in the original version, but it gives you a bit of a feel for the upper deck for the layout. So it's kind of fun. With this one, we ran the GoPro on the car backing up and videoed against a train coming down the grade. So in this particular one, you're going to see a train coming at us rather than looking at the scenery. So it's the same general area you saw a minute ago, although there's more scenery, structures are finished, and telegraph poles, that kind of stuff. So this is that upper deck. There's the snow shed, all the interior work. Now coming around the corner, and then soon we'll be heading into the east portal of that Paulson tunnel. Just going into the rock cut now. Now we're inside the tunnel. And I still got to do a little bit of work to cut out the light wash there, unfortunately, but we're into the tunnel there, and then we'll come out. We'd come out the other side if we kept playing, but I didn't. So, and that's the end of the video show.